Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ave Explores Live, our weekly broadcast here on the Ave Maria Press Facebook page that unpacks and explores a little bit more about the topic that we are currently tackling in our series. Right now, of course, we're talking about Ave Explores Catholicism around the world. What does the church look like from my own zip code all the way to Ireland, to England, throughout Australia, in the Samoan Islands, Canada, Africa, all sorts of different places where the church is alive and thriving, maybe some of the challenges that the church is facing there, and ultimately, how is what's happening in Lake Charles, Louisiana, similar to what's going on in Australia, similar to what's going on in Ireland? What's unique about all of these different places where the church is alive? And I think when we do these series for Ave Explorers, the goal, the hope, is that we grow a little bit closer to Christ, that we grow a little bit more in our Catholic faith. And with Ave Explorers Catholicism around the world, we think that by looking at the church globally, we actually begin to appreciate the church more locally and personally. And so today, to help us continue to unpack that topic, is a friend of mine. Father Rob Galea is a priest, an author, a musician, and evangelist. He travels around the world. He comes to us today all the way from Australia. Father Rob and I have had the chance to work together both in Australia and in the United States of America. It's a real gift. Father Rob, thanks for joining us on Ave Explores Live.
It's so good to be there. It's a good morning from here and a good afternoon from there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you again for taking the time. Father, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, and maybe what you've done in the past few months, especially with COVID kind of changing some of your ministry.
Well, I'm a Catholic priest and I live and work in Victoria, Australia. So I look after a parish on the weekends. So I supply in a parish. But my work is a full-time I run a non-for-profit organization where we work in evangelization. So this year over COVID, we've shifted everything online from traveling all around the world. Like 2019, I was on a plane 300 times, spoke to 1.6 million people across the world. And now, and then in 2020, it shifted everything online, and it has grown immensely, our ministry as well. I've gone from 2 staff now to 9 staff. So
wow.
We're a ministry that is growing and our reach is becoming bigger, and it has been a really difficult time, a very difficult time, especially in the United States, where you're still struggling, while here in Australia, we actually don't, the virus is non-existent. So we've beat it for now. It comes and goes. We are pretty much normal here. While there's a lot of struggling around the world, but we continue to minister to those in isolation as well.
Yeah. So let's zoom back to that 2019. We actually got to work with each other at NCYC in Indiana, and then again at the huge national youth conference in Australia. Of all the places that you went, those 300 days on a plane, where was the furthest from your front door?
Oh, I suppose it would be Europe. Europe is the furthest that you could get here as such. So I traveled around Europe quite a bit. My family is all from Europe. So my home, where I was brought up, is in Europe. So it's just, that was the furthest place. But yeah, I got to travel to some beautiful places and encounter the church. As you're talking about the church in different parts of the world, I got to encounter the church all around the world over the last few years. I think I've visited nearly every continent in the world. So just got to see the church, to experience the church in just such diversity. We sometimes don't realize just how big and how alive the church is.
So what are some of those things you've seen, in Europe, for example, that's vastly different from the church in Australia, or any of the work that you've done in some of those other countries you've been?
Well, I think, first of all, there's one thing that is the same, and that is that everyone thirsts for God, everyone thirsts for community. And this thirst for God, thirst for community is communicated differently. Of course, it's like, Katie, you work with teenagers. The way you communicate with teens is going to be, it's a different language to how you'd communicate with people who have been walking with the Lord for years. And it's the same with culture. Sometimes we don't understand how diverse culture is, because at the end of the day, we need to preach the gospel to the hearts of the people, to the minds of the people. And the way people receive depends very much on the way they've learned to communicate. Like in India, for example, I'd go and speak in India, and I'd go and sit down, and we don't know if anyone's going to show up. We have 5,000 chairs there, and hopefully 10 people will come. start the session. They tell me, okay, Father Rob, go on stage. How much time do you have? I ask. And they tell me, okay, 4 hours, 5 hours, do whatever you want. And I'm thinking,
Wow.
what am I going to do for 5 hours on the stage? So I go up and sing first song, and all of a sudden the chairs are full. 10,000 people,
Wow.
15,000 people just gather. And they're there for like from 8 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, not budging, not moving, just
Wow.
soaking it. Now try and do that in Australia. Try and do that in America. It's like after 15 minutes, they want a bathroom break, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's the incredible thirst and respect and desire for God. And so the way I communicate that, the way I evangelize, the way I speak, the way we even celebrate mass can go for an hour and a half, 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
and people want more. While if you do that again in
Yeah.
Australia, after 20 minutes, they're looking at their watch.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually had that conversation when I was in Australia. You told me a little bit about the challenges that priests especially face with, people looking down on them, or avoiding having conversations with them about how the secular world is very much butting against the faith. What are some challenges that you think the Australian church are facing currently with that
Well,
secularization climate?
look, some there's a misconception that Australia is similar to the United States when
Mm-hmm.
it's well apart, because in the Western world, the United States is probably the most religious nation in the world. I'm not saying they practice their religion, but they say, "In God we trust. God
Mm-hmm.
bless you." God is publicly displayed. While in Australia, we are the most secular nation in the Western world. So
Mm-hmm.
don't display their faith. We're told from when we're young, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. While again, politics is spoken about very loudly. I don't think you'd hear much about politics on Australian Twitter or even
Mm-hmm.
on
Not
Australian.
not the same way.
Certainly not, because we keep this. But it's because we're a nation that is fifth, sixth generation non-practicing.
Mm.
So the two things, like their parents, grandparents, great grandparents, great grandparents never stepped into a church, never walked
Mm.
into a church, never had religion. So it is just so, I wouldn't even say atheist, because it's just not even agnostic. It just doesn't register in the
Mm.
brain of people. Religion doesn't register. Community does. Like sports is the national religion here. People love sports. People love to gather for sports, for barbecues. There's a lot of social gathering, but it's never really for religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so even the language I use, the outreach that I do, I speak to people all around. I go to schools. The language I use in the United States is very different, because I cannot use religious language, and I cannot even go in sometimes in a priest scholar, because
Mm-hmm.
a priest is equated to the news on pedophilia. So
Mm-hmm.
if they see, if if a priest in a collar walked through a school, there'd be complaints from parents. What's this, basically this
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in our school, which is sad, terribly sad. But that's the way it is, and that's the way we work. Now, it is different in cities, in major cities. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if you're in Sydney or in Melbourne, there's a Catholic culture because of the Europeans there,
Mm-hmm.
because of immigrants there. But if you go to anywhere in the country, like anywhere I serve, there's that challenge. But I think it's such a beautiful opportunity, because
Yeah.
it's a new evangelization going, and this is why I use music. I don't consider myself, like, the worst title you could give me is a singing priest.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
even though I sing, even though I work with record labels and I do all of that, but for me, it's a language. It's a language to bring the hope and the love of Jesus to people.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot do it in our churches, because our churches, in the most part, are relatively empty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we need to go out. We need to go to schools, clubs, pubs, whatever it takes, wherever it takes, to bring
Mm-hmm.
people the hope and the love of Jesus.
I love that there's this, rather than see this as, oh, well, the church is dead, we'll go do it somewhere else. It's very much a, how can I approach people the way that they are comfortable, the way that they are maybe familiar to help them become more comfortable with Jesus Christ. Was the church like that where you grew up in Europe? I know you're from Malta originally. So what was that church like?
Well, that's um, the first thing is where I was brought up. It was a totally Catholic country. I don't know if I
Hmm.
just want to show you this photo. This is the church. I don't know if you can see that. This is the church where I was brought up.
Mm,
This is
mm.
the church where I was baptized, which is considered a small church.
Wow.
And like this is a photo I took on a Maltese bus on a public transport. You know,
Wow.
the statue of Mary, and then the public feasts. You know, we celebrate feasts. It's just a ridiculously, um, a
Wow.
ridiculously religious nation. 98% Catholic.
Wow.
Now, here's the difference. Now, Malta has a very secular, it has taken a secular turn. Okay, we were
Hmm.
the first country in all of Europe to legalize gay marriage, um, while divorce at that time was illegal. Thank God, abortion is still illegal, but there's a big fight to legalize that. While Australia has, it's
Hmm.
one of the like, I don't know. We just even to Victoria, where I live, there are just, I don't know, per capita, I think one of the highest in the world, abortions.
Mm.
While here, there's in Malta, there's this religious upbringing. So even the way we evangelize, even the way the church is, even the people who are away from the church know their faith. They've been catechized. They know what they're missing out on.
Hmm.
They know also the emptiness of dry religion, of religion without the encounter of God.
Hmm.
And so I think it's even harder as an evangelist myself. It's harder to evangelize in Malta than it is in Australia, because people don't have preconceived ideas of church and institution.
Hmm. Hmm.
While here, people just are
Yeah.
thirsty. Take it in. It's like
Yeah.
you're going out in the middle of the jungle and telling people about Jesus for the first time. While
Yeah.
there, seen it all, heard it all, not interested. Thank you.
Right.
Moving.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's almost kind of like what's happening in Catholic schools in the States right now is that these Catholic kids that are going to a Catholic school, they're just like, oh yeah, we're around religion all the time. We don't want to talk about it anymore. And so it's 10 times harder to try to get them to engage in, say, a prayer life or to get them excited about adoration because they think, oh, I've seen it. So it's almost like you kind of need both places to be able to be a good evangelist. You have to test the market in both places and figure out what works.
Yes, because I think it's like this mission and maintenance. You know, it's
Hmm.
that we need to outreach to people, but if we mess up the mission, the outreach, then we've lost people. But also if we mess up the maintenance, we lost.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the maintenance, a lot of the discipleship, to use another word, has become about the rules and has become about the things that they should and shouldn't do, the expectations and the way they should dress and the way they should act and the way they should receive on the hand, the tongue, which is okay, great, fantastic. But for those on the peripheries, these the, we need to reach their hearts first
Hmm. Hmm.
to impact their lives. And this, wherever you are, like even I go to India, it's the same. We're losing tens, of course in India the population is great, but millions of people because we don't do our discipleship well sometimes.
Hmm.
And anyway, I don't want to sound negative because I
No.
love the church and I absolutely love how the church is in Australia. I love the church in Malta as well. It's alive. I get so much whenever I go there. I go to every youth group and I always come back feeling charged and I owe so much of my spirituality as well. And I was brought up in the Catholic Charismatic Renewal.
Hmm.
I just owe so much of that joy and that passion for Jesus from which I got from Malta and from my family, of course.
I love that you grew up in a place that is so culturally steeped in Catholicism and are now working in a place and serving in a place and ministering in a place where that's not the case. So you kind of just answered the question in telling me that you've had the chance to go to the far corners of the world and see the church in so many different places and iterations with different people. What has that done to your priesthood? What has that done to your faith? How has that made you a better priest, a better Catholic?
Well, I think it helped me. One of the things I think I've understood is that my the presence of the priest, the person of Christ in the priesthood, I think I became a priest to proclaim Jesus in word and in sacrament.
Hmm.
Okay, and so I think the word of God and sacrament, the way we communicate this, sometimes is so much like this is the way you should do it within a church, sacraments, and the way you. But I've just come to see that the priesthood is so powerful even outside the walls of the church. The presence of Christ in the walls of the church. Recently, I went to a friend of mine was playing in a pub, so I walked in. I walked into the pub at night. Now, this is okay. You can walk into a pub at night, but this was a nightclub. Okay,
Hmm.
so I go to this nightclub, and I just see people staring at me. Like eventually someone came up to me and started to talk to me, and before I knew it, there were like 50 people around me, just sitting around me, hanging out with Father Rob.
Hmm.
And from 18-year-olds to 28-year-olds, they were just there enjoying their drink, and some of them were showing off, of course. But it's just, for them, the priest, in a sense, Jesus visited them in a place where sometimes they feel abandoned by God, the
Hmm.
lack of presence of God. And I think that's so beautiful to see that the priesthood, it's nothing to do with my worthiness, how good I am, how holy I am, but it's just objective presence of Christ that we can
Yeah.
bring everywhere. So it's just humbling as well. It's just so beautiful and humbling to be able to be a presence of Jesus in this world. And a lot of my experiences outside of the walls of the church, which is inside as well, but and it's just nothing can convince me against the fact that God works through the priesthood and in the priesthood,
Yeah.
in spite of our imperfection.
I I love that you showed up in a place, and I think this is true for a lot of us. We show up in places, we show up in spaces, or we go to different places, and we assume the church is going to look this way, or I'm going to serve the church in this particular way, and then God ends up using a completely different route into people's hearts. The person who's watching this who thinks, okay, we're talking about the church globally, we're talking about the church Australia, Malta, all these places you visited. Um, how do you think thinking about the church universally, like why is it important that we are a universal church and not just one holy apostolic, but that we are Catholic in that universal sense?
Well, I think we all thirst for God. We are all children of God. God wants to feed us. God wants us to grow to know Him, to love Him, and to serve Him. Now, the way we come to that is different, but at the end of the day, it's the one God who is jealous for us,
Mm-hmm.
the one God who draws us to Him. Now, ultimately, one thing that is so beautiful about the Catholic Church is that we have the source and summit of the faith, the Eucharist, and this is ultimately where we're drawing people. This is where but sometimes it's a quick process and people come in because of the aid of culture. For example, in Malta, in the United States, people know about the Eucharist, they can come to the Eucharist. But you go to a place like even in our Catholic schools, where it's only 51% Catholic, we're government funded Catholic schools. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're not allowed to take 100% Catholics. And even our teachers, our educators, they're not Catholic. And so you go to a place where it's a longer process. You have to almost change the culture to bring them to the source and summit. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually, slowly, I don't know if I'm changing the subject, and I don't
No,
even
this
know
is
if
great.
I answered your question. I remember when I first moved to Australia. This was 15 years ago. I said, "Can we have an adoration?" And this was in the bush in the country. And so, and first of all, the priest looked at me with daggers, like he's saying, like, "What are you trying to do? To bring us to pre-Vatican Council here?" And so, anyway, I managed to convince him for us to have an adoration, but we didn't have a monstrance. The church didn't own a monstrance. So
Wow.
what we did was we saved up, basically, we bought a monstrance. And another priest helped me at the time. And then we started adoration, but people didn't know what to do. The way I
Wow.
had to invite them in was through music. Father Rob's giving a concert. So people would come in and there's the Blessed Sacrament. They didn't know they had to bow. These are Catholics who go to Mass every Sunday.
Wow.
They just it just I don't know why that comes, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I love now, like, that church 15 years ago, this was that church every Friday still has adoration.
Wow.
and still has like it's still you'd get 30, 40 people there every Friday. So
Yeah.
I think it's just something so beautiful that we can change the culture. And this is the beautiful thing. I can be in Africa, America, and step into a church and the Eucharist. Jesus, the source and summit, still the same.
Yeah. That's
At home.
that's the best part. I mean, that was one of the most comforting things when I got off that plane after what was essentially like 28 hours of travel. There was a chapel in that conference center, and I knew Jesus is there, and I can go see him and I can pray with him. And it's the same Jesus that my husband is praying to back in Lake Charles in our chapel.
Yes, and that's so beautiful. There are like you just step into a church and you're just at home. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is another thing that architecture matters as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like the church has the kind of architecture, and I think it should be universal in a sense, in some ways.
Yeah, well, at the very least, a tabernacle that's visible, right? That we can see and we know, okay, that's where he is, and I don't have to go searching. He's front and center. Father, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now. You mentioned going digital, which arguably anybody from around the world can take advantage of some of these things that you're all creating. Give us a little bit of insight into the Father G ministry family.
So one of the ministry started when I started touring, and as a priest, I needed to employ people, and so we set up a non-for-profit to be able to do that. But and my travel continued. But over the pandemic, what happened was we started to celebrate Mass online. So we have about 12,000 to 15,000 people join us on a Sunday for Mass. And then from there, we started online courses. So right now, one of the things we're developing is online courses like on prayer, how to pray, School of Prayer. We have courses on Scripture, courses on the Holy Spirit. So they're just basically short online courses which have grown. Also, we just create resources, music, worship songs, and also we disciple people online. So we have about 10,000 people that join us every week for online retreat. Now we have a Holy Week, a free retreat,
Oh, nice.
which is which is about to begin, which begins on Holy Week. So every day for 6 days, we have Mass, we have the Triduum, we have morning Lectio Divina. Uh, anyway, so if people are interested, they can go to courses.frgministry.com/register. I don't
Okay.
know what online over there, but anyway, so that's an easy way for people to follow. Yeah, so this is what we do. We do online mission and maintenance.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We'll make sure that folks know how to find that when we post this and have the resources available to everybody. Father, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's always a joy to get to see you, even if it is just virtually. And hopefully, when we get COVID under control, we'll have you back to the States and send you all over the place to do this awesome work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing. And I of course love Ave Maria Press. They publish my book as well, so I'm grateful for what they do. And yeah, I'm excited for you. You have this radio program. I don't know if you can say on
Yes,
this.
yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, everybody's on board. We've got Ave Explore still going, and then the new Sirius XM show. So lots of fun things. You can see my fancy new mic. Lots of fun things happening in the world. Again, Father, thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure. Thank God bless you.
Father Rob has a joy that I think is remarkably obvious. At least it's obvious to me, and I've had the pleasure of spending time with him, so I've seen it, I've experienced it. I know the draw that he has, and this maintenance and mission conversation is one that I think is really important to have across the world, in all these different countries where folks are hopefully, like you said, drawn to the truth, and they see the church presenting what we teach. They see the joy that comes from the Catholic life, but there are people there to share it, whether it's the 10,000 in India or the 35 in Australia, or the 50 that gather at the nightclub and everything in between. I think as we look at this church globally, as we look at the church around the world, are drawn to this recognition that it doesn't matter where you are, and it doesn't even necessarily matter what you're saying. It's important that you are there, and it's important that you're with a person to say it, because we have this, we are compelled as Catholics, as faithful men and women, to share that gospel globally, to share that gospel locally, to recognize that our universal call to holiness is a universal global pursuit. This, of course, is all part of the Ave Explores series on Catholicism around the world. You can find everything that we're creating, the podcasts, these videos, Facebook Live conversations, articles, social media exclusives. You can find all of that available at avemariapress.com. You can sign up for the weekly email, so you'll get an email straight to your inbox that'll give you all of that content. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your shows, and listen to all these conversations. Father mentioned India. We actually have an excellent conversation this week with a young man from India who talks about youth ministry in India, as well as conversations about Samoa and climate change and the church in China. We're digging into all of these awesome content pieces about the church across the world, the church in Asia and Oceania, the church in Africa and the Caribbean, the church, of course, in North America and South America. So thank you so much for joining us this week for this conversation with Father Rob about Catholicism around the world, specifically Catholicism in Malta and Australia. And we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.